Hi, I'm Kyle Post from Sensitive Manpower, where I talk about being a highly sensitive person from the man's perspective. In my first video, I talked about how I discovered that I was a highly sensitive person, aka HSP, and how that knowledge made a big difference in my life. But then it gave way to a little bit of anger and frustration because I was 50 years old and I never heard of it. So I think there's a lot of men out there like me that might be frustrated, overwhelmed at times, not really understanding why. I think this information needs to be more widely known, and there needs to be a safe place to talk about it among men, because society is kind of set up to not really take kindly to men who are sensitive or show their sensitive side. So then we sometimes internalize it, and it can have other negative effects in other areas of our life and end up in overwhelm and things like that. So that's what I'm here to talk about. In my last video, I didn't really get into the science behind it, so I thought before I get into really dialing in on the man's perspective in more detail, I thought it'd be good to lay a foundation for the science. So that's what this video is going to be about, hopefully fairly quickly and in a way that it makes sense to you guys. But I first want to call out, a lot of my information is coming from this book from Elaine Aron called The Highly Sensitive Person, How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You. Okay, and this person, she's a psychologist, and she is the one who first sort of identified this as a real trait that could be studied, and really was the pioneer to making this actually a scientifically studied and understood trait. It's not a disorder, it's a trait, as I said in my previous video, that it is it's thought to be in about 20% of the population. So 1 in 5 people are HSPs, and it's equally distributed among men and women. So what is a highly sensitive person? Well, a highly sensitive person is someone who has a high measure of what's called sensory processing sensitivity. That's what it is. Sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. And so what is that? What the hell is that? Well, that, to define that, I'm going to go to the Wikipedia definition, which is very concise, and it's from a study done from the Ghent University in Belgium. But what they describe it as is so SPS is a personality trait involving an increased sensitivity of the central nervous system and deep cognitive processing of social and emotional stimuli. So that's actually a very good definition, but again, what the hell does it mean? I'm going to give you my sort of layman's interpretation based on a lot of the studying that I have been doing. So first of all, it's not a disorder, as I said. It's an innate survival strategy that has been actually observed in animals, and I'm going to talk about that also. So, but the first main point about being an HSP is that HSPs sense more subtleties in their environment than they sense much more subtleties than the other 80%. So it could be cues as far as how people are behaving. It could be nonverbal cues on how their body language is, and so on and so forth. Could be the actual environment itself, but we notice more things than other people do. Some of this noticing is happening sort of without our us even being fully conscious of it. Some of it's happening kind of under the hood, so to speak. So we're not always aware of all this that we're processing. But one way to describe it, one analogy was that, like, if if this part of the brain that we're using for this was sorting fruit, most people would sort fruit in small, medium, and large, but the HSPs are sorting it in 10 different sizes. So we're noticing much more subtleties. Okay. The other thing is that, and this goes hands in hand with it, is that we're deeply processing this information. And they've studied the brains of HSPs, and there's a part of the brain called the insula that is, it integrates moment-to-moment knowledge of inner states, bodily positions, outer events, so that is more active in the HSPs. There's also more parts of the brain associated with a deeper processing of stimuli and information, okay? Or processing tasks that involve subtlety. So these parts of the brain light up more for the HSPs. And so that means the purpose of this is we're comparing and contrasting subtleties in our environment so that when we encounter a new environment, we can assess what the appropriate or best course of action is. So this is an evolutionary trait, and they've observed this to be present in animals as well, in about the same ratio, 20%. So one analogy I'll use is like antelope, for example, okay? So antelope, 80% are just, following where the food is and boldly going, crossing borders of territories and going to get the food. But then there might be the 20% that are more highly sensitive, and they're comparing and contrasting their environment, saying, wait a minute, this environment reminds me a little bit of the environment where we got attacked by a cheetah, let's say. So they might be more on alert, more cautious, and they might be able to alert the rest of their herd that there's a cheetah around, perhaps. So that's kind of what this is. They think that this evolutionary trait is for. So there are two parts of the brain when it comes to acting in response to stimuli. One of them is called, I am using a little bit of notes because we're into the science, but one of them is called the behavioral activation. That is boldness and impulsiveness and pushing us towards new experiences, right? But then there's the other part that is, they called it, the scientists call it behavioral inhibition, or withdrawal or avoidance systems, right? And you can tell by just the names that there is a bias in our society, right? We value boldness and courage and all that stuff, and that's all well and good, but the cautious and analyzing to get the right response and avoiding danger is all kind of not as looked favorably upon, right? So in HSPs, this part is stronger, and it can show up as looking like a little bit of cautiousness. So when they've checked out kids when they're going into a room with a loud room with a bunch of kids playing with new toys, they might hesitate at first to say, oh, wait a minute, these toys are different, I've never seen them before, but okay, everyone's having fun, okay, I'll go in, and they might just hesitate a bit. For adults, it could show up as like making decisions. Sometimes decisions, we might take a little longer to make a decision because we're comparing and contrasting a bunch of different subtleties that many other people might not even think about. But then, when we come to this decision, it might be, more likely the right one, right? It can also show up in strategizing on how to react, or how to approach a person, or react when they're giving off some subtle nonverbal cues, right? About that they may not even be aware that they're giving off, right? Another way that this can show up, though, in the positive sense, is that you actually can sometimes, because you've already processed all this information previously, and this new situation looks similar, we might actually come to decisions quicker than other people. And in fact, many HSPs have what others describe as a strong intuition. And this intuition could just be that we have processed much more subtle variances in our environment. We've compared and contrasted, and we know we have a very strong feeling that this is the right way to go. And it might even be, a lot of this, like I've said, happens kind of behind the scenes or under the hood, some of it without our conscious awareness. So especially in the corporate environment, it can be tough to explain why you think this course of action is the right way. You can be very strongly for this action, but you have to slow down and kind of explain it. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but it can be frustrating in some sense. So that is, those are the two main things about this HSP trait. But another one, very important too, is the emotional processing, or what they call, let me see, emotional reactivity. That's the word I was looking for. So HSPs tend to mirror the emotional states of people around them. They have measured that the mirror neurons that do just that can be stronger in HSPs. So now the good news is that there's a stronger reaction to positive emotions than negative emotions, but we still do mirror both, and a little stronger than other people. So that has an effect on us as well. Now, this all leads, these a lot of these traits can be positive or negative, as you see, but one of the big negatives that ends up affecting a lot of HSPs is overstimulation. That is feeling overwhelmed. So because we are taking all of this information in, all the sensory subtleties in our environment, we're processing very deeply, comparing and contrasting, we're being affected by everyone's emotions, and our nervous system can get overstimulated and overwhelmed. And it feels like I described in my last video, where there were times that I came home from work and just I didn't want to be out in social situations. Sometimes it looks like HSPs are introverted when we may not be. We may just need to escape from the stimulation for a while, And so these are all the things that can happen with an HSP. So I don't want this video to go on too long. I want to get into more about how the society is, and how the man who's sensitive can have a lot of difficulty and challenges. But I also want to get into the positive aspect of how we can turn this into definitely a strength. Being a sensitive man is a strength. And so that's what I want to get into in future videos. Another thing too, I put it in my last video, I'm going to put it in this one. There's a test from Elaine Aron that you can assess whether you might be an HSP. Also note to the men here that men tend to score lower on this than women. So we tend to be, either we're not answering the questions totally honestly, or as true as we might think we might want to be, or we just handle emotions different than women. So even though we might score lower on this test, it might still mean that we are HSPs, or highly sensitive people. And I think we can all benefit by talking about this and amongst ourselves, and be able to control our environment so that this advantage and gift can help us to be the best men that we can be to everyone in our environment. But also it can help other people in our environment to know a little bit about it, so that they understand what we're going through. Little knowledge can go a long way in that regard. So if you're interested in hearing me talk more about this, if you have comments, please leave comments. If this is resonating with you, please subscribe. If you are interested in hearing me talk about this, or hiring me to speak about this, please go to my website, kylehpost.com, and contact me there, or subscribe to my mailing list. That's it. Until next time, thank you for watching.